There have always been two things that have had a lasting effect in times of crisis: courage for humanity and courage for technologies that can lead out of crisis. But technology is a double-edged sword. And especially here and now, when humanity is emulating reality together with machines for the first time, artificial intelligence and robotics bring us not only blessings, but also new dangers and problems for our ability to distinguish fact from fancy. We are therefore especially pleased to have international futurist speaker and AI developer Bart de Witte with us to discuss issues of data security, deepfake, and our professional future in the context of global unemployment and artificial intelligence taking over more and more of our jobs. Bart de Witte is a leading and renowned expert on digital transformation in healthcare in Europe, but also one of the most progressive thought leaders in his field. He focuses on developing alternative strategies to create a more desirable future for all of us in a postmodern world. He is the initiator of the Berlin-based non-profit organization Hippo AI Foundation. This non-profit organization aims to make artificial intelligence in medicine a community asset, creating a foundation for a sustainable and equitable society. In 2020, Bart de Witte and his Hippo AI Foundation were selected as a finalist for the prestigious Falling Words Conference Breakthrough of the Year in the Engineering and Technology category. And in 2021, he won with his nonprofit the German AI Startup Award from Axel Springer, Die Welt. He is an advisor to several companies and startups specializing in digital health and regularly lectures at various businesses, universities in Germany, Belgium, Switzerland, Austria, and China. Bart de Witte is a fellow at the Institute for Exponential Technologies and Desirable Futures, Future.io. He holds degrees from various universities in Belgium and pursued several other post-university paths at national and international business schools, including Harvard Business School. Okay, thank you, Bart, for being here and helping us with this topic of AI and robotics from tomorrow. I think what most people today are excited about are questions about their safety in the internet, how to decide what is deep fake, what is not, what is to expect from the future. Will there be a singularity? What is with our medical data, with our most private information? How does artificial intelligence, bots, etc., change our world, and what do we have to know? So I think start from everywhere what you find interesting, and then we will see where we are going here.
Yeah, thank you, Gita, for having me. I'm really honored to have and share my ideas and my thoughts. I'm a bit narrow, like AI is narrow, but I'm narrow on healthcare mostly, but I'm also looking into very other industries because AI is a broader topic which affects our society already today. So.
Yeah.
And to perhaps give an example, I was recently asked during a podcast, am I more on the side of Elon Musk, who warns about AI since years, or am I on the side of Mark Zuckerberg, who says like, this is all expected because it's not such a dangerous tool and it's just a tool. And they asked me, which side are you? And I said, well, I'm definitely on the side of Elon Musk. Not because I'm afraid of the Terminator, but because I already see how AI or a bit more specific algorithms are really altering our society. I think everybody is reading these reports about social media, how it's influencing, how it's polarizing society, how it makes people addicted, and how algorithms are just serving a business model. And I think that is really conflicting with a lot of the values of society has, and so I'm really careful about that technology because I think it's the most impactful technology we will ever create.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. You talked about addiction. How can we detect if we are addicted to the social media?
Well, I was part in 2010 of the Quantified self movement, which was a movement of researchers that had n equaling 1, which means you have data about yourself and then you optimize yourself through numbers. And then you kind of measure all these kind of things. Well, that's a very nerdy thing to do, but then you learn a lot. So I kind of tracked all my activities, and while tracking your activities, you can start optimizing your productivity or your daily life. But that's I said, like, this is not for a broader audience. It's really if you are interested in self-experimenting and in optimizing and in learning about yourself. I think there are, in the meanwhile, very good tools that look at you like on the many hours you really spent. But seeing in my environment those who are really addicted, they will never ask that question because they are so addicted. And if you ask that question, should you not, and perhaps you are spending too much time, or perhaps your political opinion is getting really extreme, and everybody has these people in their environment. I think during COVID, we all saw how polarized society became, and no vaccination, it is a flu, it is, and the world was dividing, and then you see people really digging into that, and it's really hard to convince people who are so submerged in that information flow to say that they have an issue, and I think it's like with alcoholics. If you are addicted, you first need to recognize that you have the addiction, and that's a process. And I think it's about the environment really speaking out and mentioning this. And perhaps we should on certain products have a similar label in terms of prevention, like with smoking. We have this label: smoking kills and smoking makes you addicted. Perhaps if products have addictive design or algorithms, we need to start labeling these products as being addictive in terms of working on prevention.
Interesting, you mentioned conflicts here. So if people realize or can realize that they are on a daily basis involved in conflicts on the social media, that might be a sign for an addiction.
But I think that's the most recent one. I'm not in that TikTok world, which is a very different world. But I realize sometimes, and I'm not the person that watches conspiracy videos or anything that is in that sort, but I do watch a lot of YouTube videos, which are lectures of MIT professors and others.
Okay, and, that's something different.
And I watch, but then I get suggestions of other videos. And my suggestions are not only lectures. Sometimes there are really things in there that once I start looking, I get all these kind of suggestions, which are nonsense videos. Like it is about a person kind of making a joke on his wife, and then it takes such a long time, and you keep on watching because you're curious, and then you kind of pulled into that stream and you're consuming. And then I ask myself, why does that algorithm suggest these things? Because my profile and my data and the hours I watched on lectures are perhaps 90% versus 10% trash that I look at. Everybody watches trash sometimes, but I think the algorithm then serves the business model. And I think we all have to be aware, instead of discussing data and algorithms, that when we use a product, to understand what business model these companies have, because mostly we are serving these models.
Yeah. I call this phenomenon reality emulation, where for the first time in the history of mankind, humans are emulating reality in symbiosis with machines, where algorithms make proposals for how you create your social reality and your world with other people. It's a problem of us being very young in this new era. And we have to learn how to deal with it. And you are deep into questions of data security. You are deep into questions of medical data security. And you think a lot about how mankind can be protected from our most intimate data becoming something of a capital product in economics. So I think many would like to hear what you have to say about what is important we have to provide us from.
Yes, and thank you for asking the question. So I've a healthcare background since 20 years, and I believe that by applying technology, we could kind of bring the wave of of innovation to which is similar to Moore's law out of the IT industry, which makes everything cheaper, more democratic, and gives people more access and empowers people. That this would happen in healthcare as well, but. And then there was this promise now of AI where we can empower patients, we can empower physicians or nurses in Africa where there are no physicians. So we can suddenly start scaling knowledge. And what I started to see is that the oxygen that AI needs, which is data, started to become a capital asset. And suddenly I saw that even though there is no right definition on ownership of data, because data is not something like real estate property, but there is an accumulation, there is a parallelization of data accumulation and capital accumulation. So mostly data accumulation follows capital accumulation. That means that capital is consolidating data, and that it does it directly in terms of that companies buy data access from hospital providers or data brokers, or they do it indirectly when they acquire a startup or a company. Like Google buying Fitbit is an example of that. Fitbit didn't have a really good business model. Fitbit wasn't making any profit. Still, Google paid over 2 billion. I think it was 2.6 billion for the acquisition, which means it was a data deal. I have other examples.
One question: what data? What data is there sold? I think for the average user of the internet, this is something most people don't know anything about it, or not so much. At least I don't. So please explain this a little bit further.
But Fitbit is a wearable, and I don't know how much raw data, because we always have to differentiate between the data we see as a user and then the raw data that is generated by these sensor devices.
Okay.
Raw data in sensor devices, people, sorry, but you can even monitor if somebody is masturbating or if specific activities are happening. So if you then combine it with location, and then two persons are in the same location, you could, out of the raw data, detect sexual intercourse. And you can then detect if that is the location that is not the location where you sleep with your other person. So it's the data relationships mostly that are the most valuable, not the single data. And so there is a lot of information that we as a user probably don't see, and we don't get access to. So I don't know if the raw data was part of an acquisition, because we have no insight, no transparency about this. But sensors, there are so many research papers out there that with wearables that could detect many more things than just measuring how many steps you took a day. So there is really sensitive information in these tracking devices that you could correlate. Another example: if you go jogging and you're cheating on your wife or your partner, and then suddenly you see the same jogging routes and location routes, and out of the data you could then kind of define if somebody's trustworthy or not.
Yeah.
And these kind of information can then be shared with others. These are extreme examples, but I've learned that we have to make them extreme for people to start understanding how powerful these tools are.
Thank you. And what is with medical data? What is going on there?
Well, medical data is, we have to know where medicine comes from. Like medicine is the science that actually created open science. Hippocrates, thousands of years ago, when he created the oath of Hippocrates, wrote in that oath that physicians always are obliged to share their knowledge with their peers without having any economical interest.
Yes.
So that sentence was written in there, and it made that knowledge sharing was the foundation of how the knowledge corpus in healthcare grew. And then in the 1700s, these kind of principles were taken over by other science disciplines, and it created the whole Enlightenment movement. It opened up knowledge. It allowed us to take distance from concepts where we were not informed.
Yeah.
And it brought progress, and it gave freedom, and it did all these kind of things. So the free flow of information and the open access to knowledge is one of the most important pillars for progression of society. And so in healthcare, knowledge is mostly that what is the basis of saving your life or killing someone. And having access to the right knowledge at the right time, at the right place, is that what you need to apply. So applying knowledge. And if we understand what healthcare is becoming 100% data driven in the future, because we are diving deeper into the molecular structure. So healthcare is more like applied digital biology. And we start looking at all different level of omics, like genomics, epigenomics, like proteins, how they interact. And the more computing power we have, the more we can start simulating this. Now, on an IT level, the transaction cost of doing all these things and doing discoveries, and not, once you discover it, applying them is not really a costly thing. So it could be actually a promise that suddenly we have technology that allows us to scale, similar as with the Order of Hippocrates, to scale and share knowledge in a very easy way, and then give everyone on this planet access to life-saving knowledge. Now, the opposite is happening because of the capitalization and the monetization of data. Capital is consolidating data, and that means that the capital richest organizations or regions are be able to build the best data sets, and then using these data sets to create an IP on algorithms that they train. And that's what you see happening. Suddenly Google is publishing research papers in Nature magazine about the AI that detects better breast cancer out of mammographic screening as an average radiologist. But they don't publish the source code, they don't publish the data, they don't publish the methods, and nothing of what they publish is replicable. So the basic principle of science, that you can peer review things, that you can replicate things so we can trust it, are gone. And because we want to capitalize on it. And of course they are gone because it's protected by IP. And I think that's a very dangerous change that we are going, because it means that we are creating extreme information asymmetries. We are creating a system where no part of human life, no layer of experience will be extractable for economical value. That means we have no freedom anymore, and human life will be there for mining, for corporations, without any reserve. And this process of capitalization will be, for my part, a foundation for highly unequal social arrangements. Because information asymmetries, if you look at Joseph Stiglitz's work, is that what they do? They create these inequalities and unequal social arrangements.
What does this mean for the average patient?
What does it mean that we won't see a drop in prices? We will continue on a path where profits will be made on these asymmetries, and we call it in if you have something that physically doesn't cost anything to make. So the training an AI model, if you have really good data, is not an effort anymore. But if somebody keeps that exclusively for him and says, like, I have it exclusively, and because it's so exclusive, my price can go up. And then you create something in economical terms that is called artificial scarcity, because you are making it scarce by putting a price on it, because not everybody can afford it then. And by making it scarce and putting this price on it, then this means that we will see people being able to afford life-saving treatments and others not. And if this is the model from the US, where 50% of the people, it was like 50% of the people who went bankrupt were because of healthcare costs, like privately bankrupt. 20% of the people had issues with paying healthcare bills, and life expectancy is going down since 5 years. And they are spending 18% of their GDP versus Germany 11%. Something is completely wrong. They're spending a lot of money for a worse system, and it doesn't serve everyone. So,
so what you're saying here, I'm sorry, what you're saying here is we have this problem with two-class medication and medicine for a longer time now. What you are saying is, due to AI and data policy, this problem is growing, and it's growing exorbitantly. Is that correct to say?
It can go both ways. So
okay.
The one way is that it will grow, and that's the most fashionable way, because people are blinded by numbers, and the politicians talk about we are growing our economy and we're getting investments, and this is the new economy, all these kind of things that people love to say. But there is another part that is really working on something else. I'm working on a different part.
Mm-hmm.
It can be, instead of creating and extracting the economical value out of the data, can we not extract social value out of the data and create through a different, there are different solutions out there. My solution is about creating a license that makes that data a common good, like open source software, and all the derivatives that we create out of the data are to be licensed under that same license. So we create this new ecosystem of data sets and AI algorithms that are not patentable anymore. We create an open source ecosystem.
Yeah.
So that's my way. But the most visible way is, of course, and that's what is growing rapidly, is the capitalization way. And these are the two things that we need to decide. And unfortunately, not a lot of people understand the consequences when we take that capitalization part. Nobody asks themselves the question: what happens if Google searches 92% market share in Europe? If one single company has 92% market share on all life-saving knowledge,
mm-hmm.
what happens?
Yes.
And it doesn't mean that we're going to see advertisement revenue models. It will be a very different model. And you just have to look at the US for doing.
Thank you. Are we facing here another problem with medicine taking a specific direction due to big corporations gathering data only in one field? What I'm going here is, last year I heard that only 5% of all scientific texts, articles, work, etc., is read, due to the sheer mass of the phenomenon that today everybody can write papers online, etc. So there's a lot of data out there, a lot of knowledge out there we do know next to nothing about, 95%. So how do these big corporations gather their data? Where do they get their data from? And what is with this knowledge nobody knows about? What happens to that?
Like, there is a difference between using already knowledge that is being published in papers and mm-hmm. creating knowledge out of data.
Okay.
So there are different levels of knowledge, and the approach that the big tech companies are going for, but as well startups. Startups also can have the same business model as these big techs. I think it's the model that is wrong. The privatization of AI, the monetization, the closed walls that you build up, and their approach is really to collect as much data, looking at patterns, and then giving really precise answers through understanding these data relationships, and that can be on all levels. So if you look at, for example, Google, then they will try to see the 360-degree view around the patient. What do I mean by that? There's a paper that healthcare, the clinical data only makes like 40% of your health, and your lifestyle, for example, it's a much bigger influence on your health. So what you eat, how much you sleep, what your activities are, your stress level, all these kind of things. And all these things make the social determinants of your healthcare. And so that means when you start to understand these relationships between all these different data points, that you can start giving more personalized advice to prevent disease from happening. That's kind of the dream that a lot of people have, that by understanding the data, giving personalized advice, that we will then get advice. there's one big problem with that. We kind of are using an AI to give us advice, but at the same time, we are losing agency. And that's a huge issue, I think, in that sense. But that's kind of the dream. So it's data-driven. And data needs, of course, kind of a clinical value if it's about diseases. So what you see is that companies are in search of already interpreted data that then is then connected to reports, clinical reports, where human judgment is already looked at that data and understood. So we can start labeling that data with what was written in these clinical reports, and then the algorithms can then replicate that kind of decision-making of these clinicians. But I would really try to emphasize it's not only big tech, it is the system. And as long as I'm in discussions with startups and they're from a mindset, I want to keep it open, I want to keep my AI model open, I want to follow your route. And then an investor comes and they say like, no, I want you to have IP on the algorithm. And they get so much push that they then take IP on the algorithm, which in a lot of cases doesn't bring any value. But then I learned that the investor just wants to secure himself in case the startup goes bankrupt. If there is IP, he has still an asset to be sold. Mm-hmm. And that's the reason why then people are putting IP on these algorithms, where if these startups would choose an open source approach, they would get access to so much more network and data that they will move faster. And I think in the future, it will be more important to be a fast innovator as being a protector of what you have.
Yes.
And I think that's a misunderstanding, a misconception, because of these investors wanting to have an exit after 3 years, selling these assets to bigger corporations.
Mm-hmm. One more question concerning medical data. In the keynote with Dr. Stavros Malas, the former health minister of Cyprus, I learned that medicine is taking in many ways a more individual course because nobody's body is the same as the body of someone else. And in stem cell research, for example, they are learning that every single biological system turns out in other ways. So there is a tendency now to see in medicine to try to focus more on the individual and on individual therapy. How does this conflict with the idea of gathering general data?
No, I think there is. You need general data to be able to classify diseases, and you need the classification system. And the more data we will have, the more we go granular. Like for example, I give you an example. We all know there are 2 types of diabetes: type 1 and type 2. Now, when there was a paper out there that looked at genetical data and continuous blood sugar measuring data. So what diabetics are wearing, and it's a continuous flow of data that measures your daily blood sugar levels. And if you combine those and you apply machine learning to that, or AI in general terms, you will see that in type 1, they are not type 1, they are type 1 ABC. So suddenly you see that the AI clusters these patients into 3 different groups, which most probably all need different treatments because we have missed something or have not understood it so granular that on a genetic level there is a difference. So that is what is happening. The more data sources we bring together, the more we can cluster patient groups, and that clustering is then a classification that needs a different treatment. And that is always then leading to more personalized treatments. That is one part. Then there is the other part where we, as mentioned before, what AI is really doing as well is that we understand biology. So there was recently the whole human proteins, which are 23,391 proteins as a database being published as a whole with their whole structures. Protein folding was a huge research on. Suddenly that is available. We have AI that is rapidly transforming the whole drug discovery process in silico trials, which are kind of clinical trials, but in silico means digital, simulated, and causal AI will increase the efficiency of safety of traditional clinical trials, but also simulating those will accelerate clinical trials. Something we could witness with the mRNA vaccine, how fast that went. So what we will see is that drug discovery will be completely data-driven as well. A lot of the clinical trials will be also most of them will be data-driven, and we will hopefully then see a very short time frame to really bring these treatments to market. But then we hopefully see a drop in cost, because if it's not so complicated anymore and everything is data-driven, it should be cheaper. But if you don't own the data, you will never get it cheaper.
Yes, thank you. In context of the coming crisis, what would be your advice to big tech?
In which coming crisis?
Climate crisis, collapse of biodiversity, war, mass migration.
Yeah, okay, those crises. So I think one of these solutions for these crises is as well with automation, which is also a crisis in terms of job loss, and they talk about universal basic income. I have a different view on this, because if you there are concepts out there that we patients can sell our data, or at least we get an attribution for the use of our data. These are the kind of the data marketplaces or data cooperatives, all new kind of ideas to give us something back. Universal basic income, getting value for data. I think that is a wrong concept personally, because if I get $2,500 for my data, then everybody will get $2,500. That means that only large corporates can buy large data sets, because it's going to become very costly to get these data sets.
Yes.
That means that my gene therapy that I will need for perhaps a future cancer that I will have will probably cost $2 million. And then that $2,500 that I get from my data, or the $1,500 a month in universal basic income, will not matter. And you will see huge class divide. So universal basic income will only function if we discuss ownership and wealth and wealth redistribution and all these kind of things. But in terms of what I'm doing with healthcare, what I learned is we need to discuss more digital commons, like really creating common goods in a digital way. We all use Wikipedia. That's a digital common. But we can go much further in this. Like, we all know what open source did for the world. Without open source, there was no internet. Like, the TCP/IP protocols of the internet are open source. The Linux server, which runs the internet, open source. And without open source, no internet. The whole economical boom would not even exist without having access to open source. So I think the learning from this is that the more we create common goods that can be used sensibly, the more we're going to be able to give people access to tools, the more we can start collaborating. And I think to solve the crisis or the climate change, or for example, to avoid mass migration, you need a local development of the economy, for example, and you need local education. Well, if you want to develop an economy, but you don't have the building blocks to build your new digital economy, because all the data is being extracted by big tech out of your country, and you don't even have local data access, then you cannot build anything. So what we need to do is really building digital blocks of common goods. I call them in my concept data commons and AI commons that people can reuse to build something valuable. And we need to share more. We need to, not in terms of Facebook sharing, but really share assets and these valuable things, and demonetizing these assets that are being capitalized. And I think by creating these communities, we can much more localize these developments, which we need. Otherwise, we will be dominated by larger regions, which is already happening a sense. And I think it's then bringing it all back to local communities, empowering those, creating local wealth, creating resilience within these communities, and all these things. But to be able to do so, you need tools, and these tools need to be digitally available.
Yes, thank you. I have a last question, if this is okay with you. Since you are not only a futurist speaker, but also a futurist speaker who's actually coding, which is not normal. Many talk and have never written one line of code. Will there be ever a singularity? What do you see?
These future predictions are difficult because if you look, the IBM CEO said the whole world needs 10 computers or something. So there is never a right answer, and mostly you're under. There was a computer scientist of Stanford, Roy Amara, who said that we always tend to overestimate what is coming in the next 2 years, but we underestimate what comes in 10 years. So,
yes.
With that said, I think that looking at what is happening now in the AI space, these large transformer neural networks, we have seen exponential growth in the number of parameters, which means if you kind of compare it to the human brain, now we have neural networks with 1.6 trillion parameters. The human brain has 100 trillion. So we are already at 1.6% of the human brain in terms of number of synapses.
Yes.
I assume that in 5 years from now, we will have neural networks which have as much synapses as the human brain.
Mm-hmm.
Now, nobody knows what happens when you have such huge, powerful neural networks. Do these networks get consciousness? We don't even know what consciousness is. We have concepts that kind of are different concept about consciousness, but in our brain, we don't understand where consciousness from a neuroscience perspective come from. So
yes.
I think that we will get surprises that these neural networks will be able to do much more complex problem solving as what it is today. Looking one neural network being applicable in different domains. Like today, these are village idiots, mostly these AI models, but they will be able to solve really much more complex issues. And then I haven't talked about quantum computing.
Okay.
Because this is the just normal standard IT. So
yeah.
Yes, we will see a growth in artificial intelligence. In that sense, whatever that intelligence is, we don't know. And I'm not afraid of singularity in that sense that a computer will take over. I always ask the question, what if a secret company builds that 100 billion neural network, a trillion neural network design, and suddenly uses it for itself, and then applies on digital jobs online, and then starts automating all these jobs and cashes in. Because then suddenly you have the singular economy, and you have a company that is able to automate a lot of these tasks with their private AI that nobody knows about.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Max Tegmark described this really good in his book Life 3.0. And I think that will happen sooner before we even have done the singularity itself, that there is a singularity in a company, like an economical singularity in that sense. And that is even more because we talk now about monopolization and big tech, but I think we haven't seen anything yet if we don't change the game.
Okay, thank you. When it comes to singularity, I often think about an AI so smart and conscious that is slowing the internet down for everyone who's asking stupid questions.
And you have to train the AI what is a stupid question.
Yes.
And then
exactly.
you have the problem, who defines what is a stupid question?
Yes, and from the perspective of a question is something that needs an answer. Every question is stupid, right?
I think the most dangerous thing is through big tech lobbying, we created this term trustworthy AI, and I think that's very problematic because trustworthy is a human relationship between two persons. That is trustworthy, but an AI cannot be trustworthy in that sense, and it is really dangerous to create this and to anthropomorphize AI in being human in that sense. But it's a hack from the big tech industry to create that term, so we can start using this more and adopt this more, and not be the organization be responsible for what the AI is doing.
Yes.
Look at Facebook and the AI and all the issues that they have.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. This was enlightening, and our time is over. And thank you very much. We will talk a little bit further, and I'm looking forward to see you on the conference, and I think all panelists and participants will as well. Thank you for your time, Bart.